Members, it's a new day. The Senate will come to order. Secretary will call the roll.
Alvarado, Betancourt, Birdwell, Blanco, Campbell, Cook, Creighton, Eckhart, Flores, Gutierrez, Hagenbu, Hall, Hancock, Hinojosa.
Members of quorum is present. Senator Perry will do the invocation. If you are in the gallery, please stand. And on the floor.
Thank you, members. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, it's us again, all sinners with the opportunity to save by grace. We started this session. It's our first bill with many more to come. I just pray that as the times get long, the days get long, and the emotions get high, that we always temper our responses and our debates as we always do, with your will in mind and your love and grace that you extend to us every day. I just ask that I thank people on this floor for their servants' hearts. They're dedicated to serve the people of Texas. And I thank you for big thinking. You gave us a mind that's big enough to handle the challenges we face today for the Texans that we serve. But I'm also reminded we're not bigger than you. I just pray that we keep your will, your way, as we go throughout this session and this day. Travel grace to and from our districts each and every weekend. And thank you for the God that you are. And I remember the ultimate sacrifice that you made, that is a representation that we all should ascribe to through your Son, Jesus Christ. In Jesus' name, amen.
Thank you, Pastor Perry. Good prayer as always. The Dean of the Senate moves to dispense with the reading of yesterday's journal, which was just a few minutes ago. Any objection? Chair hears none. Motion is adopted. Members, if there's no objection, I'd like to postpone the reading and referrals of bills and resolutions until the end of today's calendar. Any objection? Hearing none. Motion is adopted. Members, that concludes the morning call. Senator Creighton, you are recognized for a motion to suspend the regular order of business. To take up and consider Senate Bill 2.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move to suspend the regular order of business to take up and consider Senate Bill 2.
Secretary will call the roll.
Alvarado, Betancourt, Birdwell, Blanco, Campbell, Cook, Creighton, Eckhart.
20 ayes, 11 nays. Rules suspended. Chair lays that on third reading and final passage, Senate Bill 2.
Senate Bill 2, relating to the establishment of an education savings account program.
Senator Zaffirini to speak on the bill.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President and members, consistent with my voting dating back to Senate Bill 10 in 1999, today I will respectfully vote against vouchers, which are referred to as education savings accounts in Senate Bill 2. My vote reflects my commitment to ensuring the integrity of our public education system and to protecting equal educational opportunities for all Texas students, regardless of their zip code or financial background. Although some statewide polls indicate support for vouchers, I believe responses were colored by the questions asked and that results would be different if questions were framed differently. Counter to those poll results, my constituents consistently have expressed their preferences for expanded educational opportunities within the public school system and their opposition to diverting taxpayer dollars to private schools with little to no accountability. More specifically, members, this session, 459 constituents in 355 emails and 104 phone calls have contacted me in opposition to Senate Bill 2, and only one constituent in one letter has asked me to support it. Because this is representative government, my vote is based on the needs and interests of Senate District 21, balanced with those of our great state. Education in all arenas and at all levels is my highest priority. As a graduate of Ursuline Academy, the mother of a St. Augustine High School graduate, and the grandmother of students at Austin St. Michael's Catholic Preparatory School, I strongly support private schools. Parents who choose private schools, in our case for religious education reasons, also choose to pay tuition to educate our children. They do not, we do not, or should not expect the government to assume their educational financial obligation when public schools are inadequately funded and public school teachers are inadequately paid. If they were, I would consider supporting this kind of financial assistance for private schools, on the condition that the funding be in addition to, not in lieu of, funding for public schools. Although public schools are the foundation of Texas communities, Senate Bill 2 would divert their critical funding to private institutions. This threatens to widen educational disparities, particularly for rural and underserved students who do not have access to private schools. Senate Bill 2 also does not ensure that private institutions accepting voucher funds would accommodate students with disabilities or those requiring special education services. It would require parents who accept ESAs to waive their federal and state special education rights, leaving vulnerable students without necessary support services. Equally disturbing, private schools receiving these funds would not be subject to the same curriculum standards, admission and expulsion policies, or non-discrimination requirements as public schools. This lack of regulation means taxpayer dollars would support institutions that do not adhere to the same accountability measures as public schools, creating an inherently inequitable system. As legislators, our highest priority should include adequately funding our public schools. Strengthening public education means prioritizing resources, supporting teachers, and improving access to quality education for every student in Texas, not only those pursuing a private education. I hope to continue to work with my colleagues to develop policies that enhance educational opportunities for every Texas student and ensure taxpayer dollars serve the public good. Accordingly, I will respectfully vote no on Senate Bill 2. Thank you, Mr. President and members.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Johnson. What purpose?
Statement on the bill.
You're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President and members. What if we were to try to improve the public highway transportation system with toll vouchers or toll savings accounts? We could call them TSAs. And we could issue them to, 2% of the people. It happens to be that maybe 90% of the people who would take those toll vouchers or toll savings accounts have already been driving on toll roads. And what would you think if you lived in a district that didn't have a toll road and that was likely never to have one, and yet your tax dollars were going to be used to subsidize somebody's comfortable ride in their comfortable car from their comfortable suburban house on their toll road to their comfortable office building? I think that you would think that was not a very good idea, and yet here we are doing kind of a lot like that, with our public education system, that we're going to give money to a very small percentage of the people to somehow improve public education overall, and I'm not buying it. So I'd like to examine a couple things that are clearly not true about the bill as presented. We've seen various iterations of education savings accounts and school vouchers over the last few years, but this one in particular is the one that's on the floor, and I want to talk about that. Some things that aren't true about it. It's not about parent choice. It's not about parent choice of schools. Again, only 2% of today's public school children are expected to make the move from public school to private school. So 98% of the people aren't making a choice. 95%, this is according to the analysis we have on the bill, 95% of the kids who will receive the vouchers are already in private schools. Where's the choice? It is not about school choice. So that's what it's not about. It's also not about saving kids from failing public schools. Again, 2% of the students in today's public schools are going to wind up in the private schools. So maybe it's about 2% of the kids being saved from public schools. Maybe there's better ways we could save them, but let's grant that. 98%, that can't really be what the bill is about. I just generally don't say the bill is about something that 98% it isn't. Finally, it's not about money following, I'm sorry, I want to go back about it not being saving kids from public schools. This bill has an income threshold of 500% of the federal poverty level. That's about $160,000 a year. Ask ourselves, how many kids whose parents are earning $160,000 a year are finding themselves in failing public schools today? How many kids whose parents are earning $30,000 a year are in failing public schools today? If it was really about pulling kids out of failing public schools, it would not be aimed at more affluent families. And finally, about the money following the student. As I mentioned, 95% of the students and 90% of the money is going to go to kids already in already in private schools or homeschooled. You can't follow the kid. The money can't follow the kid if the kid is already there. So let's look at some things that are true about this bill. It is true that school vouchers and education savings accounts have been a years-long campaign that represented to the public that was about the very three things that I just explained that it isn't. It's been represented to the public that it's about school choice. It's been represented to the public, it's about the money following the student. It's been represented to the public that this is about saving kids from private schools, and we just established that it didn't do that. What it does instead is redistribute wealth to a large degree from suburban areas and rural areas to urban areas where there are private schools, and moves money into private schools, 75% of which in Texas, 75% of private schools in Texas are religiously affiliated. Many of them are fantastic schools. But make no mistake, we are moving public tax dollars into private religious schools, which should give us some constitutional concerns. Historically, we haven't done it, and that's a reason. Finally, Senator Creighton, I think you've made a good case that this bill does not destroy the public education system. I agree with you. It's 2% of kids. It's not that much money. It's not taking 95% of the money out of the public schools. It's really doesn't do a whole lot of anything except take public tax dollars and transfer them to private schools for kids and parents who are already using the private schools, many of whom are making a pretty good income. So I want the record to be clear what this bill is and isn't. I know there are good intentions by the bill. I know there's some analysis behind it about what effects it might have. I actually wanted to challenge one of those. Senator West and Senator Creighton had a discussion about racial disparities that may be associated with this bill and other bills like it. Senator Creighton and many people who've worked hard on this bill, I know you've reviewed studies of other states' experiences. The state of Florida was cited for its success at promoting non-Anglo students. If you look at Florida's income threshold to qualify for an education savings account, it's 185%, not 500%. And as I was discussing with Senator West, I don't think it would be controversial to suppose that the demographics of the average family with a 500% FPL, federal poverty rate income level, is different than the demographics of a family at 185% of the federal poverty level, which equals about $55,000. I don't think there's racist intentions to the bill, but there may well be racial effects that are bad for our society. And finally, although this bill, I think very certainly won't take down the public education system, I hope we all still value the public education system. I'm certain most of us do. I think it might be fair to say that at the point at which this truly becomes a program about school choice, where some significant number of our public school parents and our public school students are making the choice to leave the public schools to the private schools. At the moment it's really about school choice, that's when it really destroys the public education system. Because if we have half of our kids leave our public schools, they will crumble and they will fall. And I don't want to see that happen, so I will oppose this bill. Thank you, Mr. President and members.
Senator Miles, you're recognized. For what purpose?
Statement on the bill, Mr. President.
You're recognized.
Thank you. You know, colleagues, last week during the Holocaust Remembrance Day resolution, this body made it clear in stating that if you forget the past, you're doomed to repeat it. So it kind of pains me that we're here right now on track to do just that this evening. It's also ironic that we're here debating this issue on the 5th day of Black History Month on a month that some people today say we no longer need. Time and time again, I stand before this body as a minority trying to explain things that are discriminatory, and somewhat with a racist tone for people like me, that look like me. So members, let me hold your hand and remind you of the history of when vouchers were created to resist integration. It is history that we are doomed to repeat because of the systematic erasure of DEI and critical race theory. In 1954, the Brown versus Board of Education, in many states in the South, set up school voucher systems to allow white families to escape integration schools so that they can go back to their life under the Ferguson versus Ferguson, separate but equal. Think about that. States also began to defund public schools at that same time. Schools that served the children of color and closed down black schools, which eventually closed and crumbled black communities. You know, Senator King, you use the principle that if it happens, then believe it can happen again. So hear me when I say to you, it will happen again. If we pass this voucher bill, let me repeat it, it can happen and it will happen again. School vouchers divert much needed funds from public schools, which serve as majority of the students. These schools are already underfunded, overburdened, outdated resources, and insufficiently funded and supported for students with special needs all day, every day. Vouchers only exacerbate the inequities of the public schools faces. Listen, leading to the future decline of quality education for students who cannot afford to leave the public system. Everybody won't be able to go to a private school, y'all. Please understand, the public school will close and the communities will fail. They will fail. Senator Hall, you said it's important that we do. That we don't forget the culture of hatred of the past. That was your word, sir, just the other week. However, at every turn, this body proposes and passes legislation that does just that. Forget the culture of hatred of the past. We forget about it. The question should be that we're all asking ourselves is why? And why now? Why are we bringing the ghost of segregation back to life today? We all know why. It's the political culture right now. The modus operandi of this country, as of late, has come down to party lines. Look at the bill today. It went right down party lines, which obviously is not excluding our great state of Texas. It comes down to who is the deepest pockets instead of what's best for the people and what's best for Texans. School choice is not a choice of the family. It's a choice by private schools to select who they want to allow in. There's no transparency. There's no security. There's no accountability. Private schools that accept vouchers are subject to the same level of oversight, are not subject to the same level of accountability as public schools. This means that they don't have to meet the same standards for our teacher certifications, curriculums, students' outcomes. For instance, this body passed the Crown Act last session, which was signed into law by the governor, Governor Abbott, to prevent students from being discriminated against because of their hairstyle or the texture of their hair. By approving vouchers, we will be providing taxpayer funds to institutions that are not required to comply with the protection of these kids that we just worked hard to ensure for all those kids. Also, with public funds going to private institutions, there's little transparency about how effectively those funds are being spent. I hope that by now you have a map that they have passed out to you. The other day, I was looking at this map. This is a map of private schools in Harris County. Senator Betancourt, I want you to stay with me on this one. Is he here? Private schools in Harris County. This map right here, if you take 288 from the south to join 45 going north, straight through downtown and straight through the middle of Houston, Texas, and divide the city east and west, all the dots you see on the west side are private schools. On the west side, which is an affluent white community and white area. The little bitty dots, the few dots that you see on the east side are black and brown communities. Take a look at that. It's pretty clear. It's pretty clear. The west side is historically wealthy and predominantly white. Looking at this map, who do you think is going to benefit from this bill? I think it's pretty easy to see, easy to tell. These are the private schools that exist now in Harris County. Vouchers will widen the gap between the wealthy and the poor, as families with more resources are better able to take advantage of private school options. This can lead to increasingly segregated by race, class, and ability to undermine our efforts to create more equitable educational opportunities for all students. According to the National Education Association, in Arizona, only 5% of the students that took advantage of the state's voucher program came from zip codes where the median income is at least $49,000 a year. The majority of the families that took advantage of the vouchers came from zip codes where the median income was between $81,000 and $178,000. So basically, the same map, different state. Further, in other states that have created voucher systems, the vast majority of recipients were already in private schools and had never attended public schools ever. In Arkansas, 95%, Florida, 69%, Iowa, 80%. Are we starting to see a pattern here? Do y'all start to understand a little pattern? Focusing on family income alone does not quite touch the central problem of this bill. Why are our tax dollars to pay for vouchers? What does it ever cover, even cover? It doesn't even cover the full cost. Private school tuition. The average private school tuition in Houston is $25,000. Where do you expect to get a working class family to making a household income of $35,000 to get the other $15,000? That's why it's not necessarily a low income benefit. It's definitely for a family of three, as up to almost $134,000 a year. It is the only way for legislation proponents to say, with a straight face, we're helping low-income families. The taxpayer money that we propose to use to fund these vouchers could go to much further if we focus on all our students rather than the 2% of our school children. The average public education teacher's salary is $57,000. If you divide that by 1 billion, the voucher appropriation, by the average teacher salary, you get 17,000 teachers. TEA states that around 9,000 public schools and school campuses in Texas. So for the same amount of money, we could put at least one teacher in every public school in the state right now. Going further, by 2030, this program is expected to cost $4.6 billion. That's billion with a B. And that $4.6 billion, current average salary would equate to 79,000 teachers that we could pay for almost 9 new teachers in every public school in the state of Texas. In some rural communities, that's a full school. 9 teachers? Let me bring it a little local to Harris County. What happens if only one kid in Harris County, in HISD district, participates in the program? The district will lose more than $15 million per year. That equates to a salary of 234 HISD teachers. HISD has 274 campuses. So that's a loss of almost one teacher at every campus. And I'm willing to bet that instead of the one teacher at every campus, the district will save money by merging schools instead. This could put teachers directly in danger of losing their jobs, y'all. Think about it. If we pass this legislation, we'll be robbing around 98% of our children's futures in public schools. Possibly even schools to make sure that around 2% of the children get a private school education. So we're going to sacrifice all this for 2% of our children in the state of Texas can get a private education. Texas education will be two-tiered, separate, but I guarantee you it'll be unequal. I believe we should fund our public schools for all children of Texas by raising the basic allotment before we even consider additional handouts for our wealthy. How can we guarantee the pension of existing retired teachers? Common sense, just strictly common sense, says that if there are less teachers contributing to the pension, the only way to keep the pension stable without costing taxpayers more money and hope of population is the hope of population growth, or take more contributions from existing teachers. We could not in good conscience put teachers in a situation without seriously investing in them every biennium from here on out. I just want to say this out loud and make sure it's sound, because it sounds really perplexed in my head. We're going to give Texas taxpayers, affluent families across the state of Texas in cities like Houston and Dallas and our rural areas, that national statistics already say those kids are probably already in private school. $10,000 for private tutors, for SAT prep, transportation, and other ancillary items. Also, let me repeat, look at the fiscal note, $4.6 billion per year by 2030. We're going to spend $4.6 billion by 2030 on SAT preps, private tutors, transportation, and other ancillary services. This makes no sense in my head. I don't know about anybody else's. If we go through this with this program, we'll grow to cover about 8% of the students by 2030. What's going to be left of the 92,000? We're designing a separate but definitely unequal system by which we will all cost the state more money and resources. We're deciding between the haves and the have-nots. All we have to do is invest in our people. I repeat, the greatest strength that I always sit up here and say that Texas has is its people and its diversity. Texas has relied time and time again on the strength of the people and its diversity. All of our districts may look different, their needs may be different, but one common thread that they all desire to have: equity and equality when it comes to the teaching of our children. That's all anybody can ask for, because quality education has always proven to be the great equalizer. I'm sure that history is going to show that this body has created a separate but unequal education structural system and made it law by sacrificing the masses for the very few. Highlighting all the negative consequences of the vouchers and ESAs, our public education system, and long-term society impacts may have. Diverting public funds to private schools through vouchers and ESAs undermines the very system that guarantees the right for every child. Just as we would not tolerate erosion of acceptance or any other public provision, we should not implement policies that weaken the public education system and limit opportunities for every student who needs them the most. The students who need them the most, we're getting ready to limit the opportunities. In the end, school vouchers and ESAs will make it harder for all students to succeed because of its educational inequalities it creates. That's why I will be voting no. Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, members.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Blanco? What purpose?
Thank you, Mr. President. To speak on the bill.
You're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members, I rise today respectfully in opposition to Senate Bill 2 because, from my perspective, it does not expand real choices for Texas families. Instead, it drains public schools from critical resources, leaving rural communities, English learners, and working families in my district with fewer choices, not more. Many of us here, as I do, represent communities where the public school is the backbone of the community. In places like Presidio or Van Horn, Fort Stockton, there are no private schools there. No way to transfer to a private school down the road in those towns. These communities rely on their public schools, not just for education, but for meals, for special education services, for after-school programs, and for many, even healthcare. So if we start funneling taxpayer dollars into private schools through vouchers, we're pulling away resources from Marfa ISD and pulling from Alpine ISD and Terlingua ISD, leaving teachers with fewer resources and with less support. I don't think that's choice. This bill may negatively impact the very schools that educate vast majority of our children. And it diverts taxpayer dollars to private schools that, as we heard in today's debate, that are not required to accept all students, that are not held to the same accountability standards, and do not provide the same bilingual or special education services that our public schools are required to do. So what does that mean? That means for rural schools, which are already stretched thin, they're going to lose funding. We're forcing them to cut teachers. We're forcing increased class sizes. We're eliminating programs that give students a chance to compete. So members, Senate Bill 2 does not do enough to support Texas English language learners. I try to add that in one of our amendments. And one of three students in my district is an English language learner. And public schools serve them. Private schools do not serve them. They do not have to serve them. So from my perspective, it's not school choice. It's the school's choice, what we're doing here. Public schools are legally required to provide bilingual education and English language support. Private schools receiving vouchers funds will have no such requirement. So that means thousands of Texas children who are working hard every single day to try to learn English are going to be left behind without the support that they need. So this bill doesn't give those English learners more choices, it gives them fewer choices. It takes away the funding that public schools rely on to hire those bilingual teachers, to provide those specialty programs that they need, and to close those achievement gaps. If we believe in choice, well then let's make sure every child has a fair choice, a real choice. Because those rural kids don't have that choice. And that means investing in schools that support every student regardless of the language that they speak and where they live. It hurts the very schools that serve the most students, leaving those kids behind. It sends taxpayer dollars to these private schools that are not accountable to Texas families. It fails English learners, it drains rural public schools, And it makes the problem in our education system worse, not better. So, colleagues, I know we all want a strong education system. I don't doubt that, but I am concerned about diverting these tax dollars to private schools that pick and choose their students. I don't think it's the way to get there. Stripping rural schools from resources, I don't think it's the way to get there. Instead of picking winners and losers, we should make greater investments in all our students. I think we should fully fund our schools. We've got the money. We should pay the teachers what they deserve. And we should ensure that every single child, whether they live in my district or in your districts, they have real opportunity to succeed. I think that's a promise of a public education system. It's in our Constitution. And I think it's what Texans believe in. So for my rural schools, my ELL students, and the public schools that shape me, I will respectfully be voting no on Senate Bill 2. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Eckhart, for what purpose?
I rise to speak in strong opposition to the bill.
You are recognized.
Thank you so much, Mr. President. There is no mystery about how this is going, and we all knew what the vote was going to be. We have so thoroughly self-segregated our body that Republican Senator Creighton could not accept a single Democratic amendment. Not a one. We are so thoroughly self-segregated that any amendments had to come under his name or one of our other Republican colleagues' names. And it had to happen before we hit the floor. That is how segregated we are. And this bill itself acts to further the self-segregation of the state of Texas. We have a constitutional obligation to provide a system of free public schools. And yet a majority in this chamber neglects the essentials to lavish money on a tiny segment of Texans who send their kids to private school. Nowhere in the Texas Constitution does it say that we have an obligation to subsidize private schools, and nor should we. When the state is failing on so many of our constitutional obligations, we are dead last in the number of Texans with health insurance. We are dead last in access to mental health care. While 140 Texas counties don't have a private school, half of those counties also don't have a hospital. We are among the 10 worst states in criminal justice, among the 5 worst in protecting our environment. Our grid failed, even though we are the largest producer of energy in the United States, and we may run out of drinking water if we don't act decisively this session. But miraculously, our system of public education is not ranked at the bottom. We are actually pretty average, despite our overall funding being flat or declining since 2019. Despite teachers being paid $9,000 less than the national average. In spite of per pupil funding being $4,000 less than the national average. And don't be deceived by the creative accounting of $14,000 to $16,000 per student. The actual number that is an apples-to-apples comparison is the $6,160 per student that's truly comparable to the $10,000 that we're proposing to pay to private schools in this bill. And while Senator Creighton says it's a myth that this plan takes funding out of public schools, his assertion runs into some problems, let's say, since schools in my district alone will lose $35 million for a 1% transfer to private schools. $35 million translates to 538 teachers. And recapture will increase due to this transfer to private schools. AISD recapture alone last year was $693 million. The statewide recapture, $2,873,985,918. We won't stay barely average if we move $1 billion to private schools and siphon off 1% or more of our students from our public schools. And I want to speak to the race issue, which is kind of weird for me, right? I am a white woman representing a district that is, like private schools, over 70% white and wealthier than the average Texan. But this bill is not for low-income Texas students. At 500% FPL, it's available to kids of engineers, economists, law professors, dentists, orthopedists, 80% of all Texans. This bill is not for kids of color. Under Senator West's questioning, Senator Creighton admitted that 70% of private school students are white. Under Senator Gutierrez's questioning, although Senator Creighton was uncomfortable with it, it's corroborated by the LBB analysis that more than 75% of the recipients of these vouchers will be students who are already in private school, meaning that private school enrollment is not going to get any less white with this program. I have no problem with private schools. Like I said, my constituency looks a whole lot like private school attendees, more than 70% white and wealthier than the average Texan. I have no problem with private schools, as long as they don't take all the advantages of public funding with none of the obligations. They don't have an elected school board binding them to their community. They don't have any open meetings requirements. They don't have to publicly share their budgets. They don't have to use certified teachers. They aren't subject to state testing requirements. They can advertise to lure students away from public schools. They can lobby with their private funds, just as charter schools do now. And most of all, they don't have to educate all Texans because they are private. They can cherry pick their students from among the families that can afford tuition. They can cream. They can pick the trophy kids, the legacy kids, the kids that are most profitable. And that is their private prerogative. But not if they're publicly funded. So in closing, I want to speak directly to my constituency. As I said, mostly white, mostly wealthier. 97% of my constituents who reached out to me on this bill oppose it. When this private school voucher ESA passes, my constituents are going to be inundated with advertisements from private schools attempting to lure them away from their neighborhood public schools. Inundated, because my constituents are the perfect target. But I am begging my constituents to stick with our neighborhood public schools. Engage, 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 stay engaged. Because if we lose our public educational system, we all lose. All of us.
Senator Menendez, for what purpose?
To speak against the bill.
You're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Much of it is sad, so I'm not going to be repetitive. Mr. President, members, you know, we've heard advocates of this bill have said the program offers students an education that best fits their needs and interests. And while we can all recognize that not all students come from the same mold, background, or zip code, that not every student can thrive in an ordinary educational setting, some require more resources, services, or specialized curriculums. Some public schools cannot accommodate the needs for all their students. And currently, parents do have the power, with or without this bill, to explore their educational options, whether they be the neighborhood public school, a charter school, homeschool, or even a private school. We know that public schools are not one size fits all, and we can't ignore the innovative programs but we cannot ignore the innovative programs that public schools have taken to suit the needs of their students and their communities. In my district, the Edgewood Independent School District has Las Palmas and Roy Cisneros leadership schools that are built around making leaders in an all-girl and all-boy schools, respectively. They offer two-way dual language instruction. They partner with the Texas Council for International Studies and foster empowerment in young people. Northeast Independent School District has ICSI School, offering students concentrated lessons in cybersecurity and networking that prepares them for college and in-demand, high-paying careers. Northside has a Cass Tech High School, who just visited my office this week to tell us about their dedication to graduating passionate educators in a state with significant teacher vacancies across every area of specialization. On the subject of special education, we absolutely need to do more for those children. We have filed several bills to improve their funding, policies, and supports available to those students. And I hope that my colleagues here in this chamber and across the rotunda who vote for this will keep their doors open to discuss and support how we support our special education children. But rather than addressing the root causes of why these students struggle, this bill just leaves money on the table and opens the door for discrimination. Public schools do not get to pick and choose who they take, no matter what their religion, nation of origin, test scores, whether they have documentation. They can't turn away a child with disabilities because they just don't have the resources to serve them. If a public school cannot provide services to a child with special needs, schools legally have to pay for their placement in a place that does. One of my school districts is paying millions of dollars a year for a single student. This ESA bill offers $11,500 if you can find a school that'll serve your child, and in the fine print, you sign away your rights as a parent for children with disabilities. Then there's the argument of school choice that the bill provides students and parents the opportunity to choose the education that best fits their needs. But Texas already has school choice. Private schools offer scholarships to students. School districts, as I mentioned, offer specialized schools. And our homeschoolers have some of the least regulated policies in the nation. So much so that they came and testified against the bill because they were afraid of government intervention. In my opinion, SB 2 seeks to spend $1 billion to build a separate but unequal education infrastructure. Members, public schools are closing left and right in my district because they can't afford to stay open. This $1 billion could be spent to invest in our public education system. It could be used to fund fine arts, mental health programming, to improve all students' outcomes and safety. It could be used to fulfill half of the special education deficit our public schools are trying to fill without funding. It could be used to feed every public school student free lunch. Instead, we're injecting the largest, first ever investment, as we heard from our chairman, in the nation into a program that very well is going to potentially destabilize our public schools. Members, the reason I believe we make a mistake today with this bill is because we jeopardize the future of so many communities across this state. As we've heard, 98% of the students will never participate in the program. For that 1.7, 1.8%, so they can have an opportunity to potentially try something different, even though we've heard that many of them already are in private schools. And in many ways, it goes counter to our Constitution. I'm holding here Article 7, Education, titled The Public Free Schools. In the very first section, support and maintenance of a system of public free education. These are the words of our founding fathers. A general diffusion of knowledge being essential to the preservation of the liberties and the rights of the people. It shall be the duty of the legislature of the state to establish and make suitable provisions for the support and maintenance of an efficient system of public free schools. That should be our North Star. This should be our guide. Providing $1 billion for people to potentially offset the expenses they're already using, when, as we've heard, very few have asked us for. This does not show our commitment to the future, and it concerns me. And for those reasons, I respectfully will vote against Senate Bill 2. Thank you, Mr. President, members.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Cook, for what purpose?
To provide a statement on the bill.
You are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I appreciate the opportunity to share my heart and my mind with y'all tonight. As a new member, I have not had this conversation multiple times with y'all, and quite frankly, opposing this bill and my dogged support for our traditional neighborhood public schools is a primary reason that my district sent me here. I want to address one thing before I start. There was a lot of statements made about the guaranteed or supposed guaranteed success of this program. But I'm looking at multiple studies from multiple states that show the students who received vouchers and moved to private schools saw significant declines in math performance and lower scores in reading, science, and social studies. The negative effects persisted past 2 years. Many students who initially leave public schools for private voucher schools end up returning to the public school system. I don't believe that the success of this program is at all guaranteed. And I also fear that it will chip away at our traditional public education system. In the emergency department, I provide the gold standard of care to every single person who comes through the door, no matter how sick they are, no matter how injured they are, no matter how badly they need me. We do whatever it takes. No matter how many people show up to my emergency department, we do what it takes to provide the gold standard of care. And I'm so proud of that. And it's good and life-saving policy. Public education operates on that exact same principle, serving every single child regardless of what their families can afford. School vouchers or education savings accounts threaten to dismantle that promise. My office has heard from students, parents, teachers, staff, from public schools, private schools, and homeschoolers. And all of them have expressed discontent with this bill, and the people of SD 15 do not support it. Constitutionally mandated public education is a primary pathway, sometimes the only pathway, for students to achieve financial security and opportunity. ESAs or vouchers divert resources from our public schools, from our general revenue fund, which is what we use to fund our public schools, and create a two-tiered system. Well-funded private schools for the select few, and underfunded public schools struggling to meet the needs of the majority of Texas children. I take care of these parents, y'all. I see them. I see the emergencies and the difficulties and the burdens that they face every single day. And we should not be asking them to do more, to apply, to jump through hoops, to navigate red tape for their kids to maybe have access to a good education. Our job is to take one thing off their plate. Make sure that they have access to a nearby high-quality school for their kiddo. We should be fully funding the systems that already exist and are guaranteed to serve them and all Texas kids. We need to fully fund our public schools. We could be using the hard-earned taxpayer dollars of every Texan to fund smaller class sizes, higher teacher pay, school safety, everything that my colleagues have talked about tonight. And instead, we're about to take that money and give a coupon to the rich. The truth is, public schools in Texas have never been properly funded. And that's the only reason that we're having this conversation here tonight in the first place. But this program is going to make the problem worse. Instead of benefiting the few, we got to work together to serve all. And it is with Texas children, public health, and my district in mind that I'll be voting no on SB 2. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Campbell, what purpose?
I rise to speak for SB 2.
You're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members, segregation most certainly is a history that cannot be forgotten. And as such, we employ options that do not produce segregation. Many discussions are led by passions from the heart, but feelings have no intellect. And this discussion must be guided by wisdom. That being said, Thomas Sowell, a great economist and social theorist, speaks to the point that school choice does not inherently lead to segregation and says, in fact, school choice can provide opportunities for students from diverse backgrounds to access better educational options. Parents choosing schools, regardless of their location, can help break the link between residential segregation and educational inequality. Thomas Sowell, his position emphasized the potential of school choice to actually disrupt existing patterns of segregation by providing families with more educational opportunities. Children with this bill will have a choice. And a choice, members, is a choice. Chairman Creighton, thank you for bringing this bill forward. Members, I urge you to vote for this bill. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Creighton, you're recognized for a motion. And you may speak if you wish on final passage.
Thank you, Mr. President. Make a motion for final passage of Senate Bill 2, but I would like to reserve comments for closing.
That would be now.
Mr. President, I had a short, somewhat bland, and celebratory closing. I've changed my mind. I'm not keeping up with the time. That's probably a little rude. But who are we here for? Who are we spending all this time for? You hear comments and the rhetoric that we just heard that are the talking points of the American Federation of Teachers, emailed straight from Randy Weingartner, right out of Washington, D.C. Is that fair of me to say? Yeah, because I can print them. It's incredible. It's incredible after all of the facts that we've laid out today that are irrefutable about the budget that we're advancing in the base bill for public schools and new public school money, historic new dollars for public schools in Texas and our Texas teachers. It's incredible that we would hear the rhetoric that we just sat through. I want to thank Governor Patrick for leading all over this state on this issue and standing for families, listening to families. Lieutenant Governor Patrick, thank you for that. I want to thank Governor Abbott for naming this an emergency item. 2 sessions in a row. An emergency item that we should work with urgency together. We have plenty of issues that we could oppose and vote opposite one another, separate from a bill that is weighted 80% within a framework to help special needs kids and income vulnerable kids have a fighting chance at a better education. That's amazing that this center aisle that doesn't divide us by party has nothing to do with a bill that helps kids dividing us by party. That's incredible. After all that discussion and debate, Senator Johnson quoted that 90% of those helped within this framework will come from private schools, even though the framework is 80% weighted for special needs kids and income vulnerable kids coming from public schools. How's that possible? That we would inject that kind of chaos into the media and on X or Twitter or whatever you want to call it, after we had all of those discussions about our intentions and what we've been doing for years to help kids that need help the most, when all of these national studies I'm depending on and conveying today that I've brought and cited, they're on my desk, show the incredible success for everything that was just refuted with no studies. Academic outcomes under school choice across the nation, better. Safety under school choice across the nation, better. State budget savings with school choice programs, better. Disabled students, families surveyed for their experience, better. Civic engagement, and these students becoming more and more involved in their community, better. Integrated students and diverse student outcomes, better. And by the way, those numbers for 74 school choice plans across 32 states are 50% white, 20% black, and 20% Hispanic, and growing on those numbers. Incredibly impressive. College readiness, better. How can we toe the line for teacher unions and lobbyists paid $850,000 in this building at 141 days to create chaos among us when we're talking about kids and students? Governor Abbott's not traveling the state in every little town across Texas, gauging support for education options for students from families that may never vote for him because he feels like it's not urgent. It's unbelievable that we just sat through all of that commentary when for 51 years we've been voting as bipartisan, as members, to support Texas equalization grants that take Texas tax money and apply that Texas tax money to a public school student that is seeking a private school opportunity. Over $500 million that everyone on this floor that's going to oppose this bill today consistently votes for. And where are your bills to repeal it? Can't find them. Where are your bills to apply strings and requirements on all those private universities where those public dollars are headed? Where are they? We're pretty good at research. Can't find them. Incredible. Incredible toeing the line for politics on marching orders from a teacher organization that takes automatic dues deduction from everyday teachers that don't have the time. They have 11 minutes for lunch in Texas public schools, and they're responsible for a bunch of little humans during that 11 minutes. They don't have time to advocate like you can. But their automatic dues deduction is taken for that purpose, to pollute the corridors of this building and to create a bunch of manufactured fake garbage narrative that ultimately hurts opportunities for kids that we're trying to create out of the surplus. Schools have never properly been funded. I worked 4 special sessions on school finance as a 19-year-old in this building on the Senate Education Committee when I was in college. We had 40 years of drama and litigation tied to school finance, and public school stakeholders said for 40 years, until that litigation is over, they would not support school choice opportunities. That litigation's over. The funding we put forward last session, historic money on a 3X factor for what we normally do for public schools. Those same teacher organizations came into our hearings and said, if we can kill 40,000 school choice education savings accounts for special needs and income vulnerable kids, we'd rather not have new money for teachers. We'd rather not have new money for public schools. And my Teacher Bill of Rights, that many of you that are opposing this bill today voted against, was graded bipartisan by many different sources and offered not only safety in our classrooms in this day and time, but offered a $10,000 pay raise for 83% of the teachers in Texas. And the rest of the delta was those teachers that were not getting the full $10,000 are already at the top of the pay scale. And you opposed it. And then it went over to the House, and it was killed by a Democratic member on the House floor by postponing it to 2029 after bouncing it around the House floor like a beach ball and having fun with it. Big smiles, big laughs. And our teachers were the ones that were hurt from it. Why does that matter when we're talking about a school choice bill? Because we're standing for public schools. That's fact. This is just a big old spoon and helping of truth. We're standing for public schools with incredible new dollars. We're funding enrollment, new growth, and incredible tranches for safety, special ed, all kinds of different funding initiatives that is just irrefutable as you close on this bill to create doubt and chaos at the expense of an 80% prioritization schedule for income vulnerable and the disabled. How? What are we fighting for? Mediocrity? Of course, our families are looking for choices. Of course, our families are asking, and isn't it amazing that they have to beg with the wealth of this state and the surplus that we have, and the fact that we're putting nearly $100 billion into public ed, and the fact that we put $39 billion new dollars into public ed over the last decade, while 76% of administrators were hired new, and 6% new teachers were brought on board. Are you in, if you're voting no today, are you in your school districts talking about that? If you're not, it's a problem. Self-segregating, and you can't find a way to join in supporting this bill. That is lunacy. Standing for kids. We're going to provide more money for public schools. But in Houston Independent School District, without new funding and with 2,000 less administrators, since the state has taken over the district, with new processes, new curriculum, incredible accountability, teachers that are bought in because those that weren't are gone, and everyone working together as a team, 139 DNF-rated schools. A year later, 121 DNF-rated schools, and a year later, less than 39. Oh, and a bond went down. Don't forget that. I think the classrooms that I've been sitting in were built in 1949 and have had a couple of chillers since then. Yes, they didn't need that help. But with 2,000 less administrators and not much new funding, the outcomes for those kids that have been left behind for years and years are skyrocketing. And we have a chance to provide opportunities for more that are trapped in a zip code because politicians arbitrarily decided that. Even though public schools are allowed to charge an actual tuition bump if a public school student transfers into another public school, and they can require additional academic performance or say no. You want to talk about parity? A charter school, if it fails 2 years in a row, it closes. Does a public school? Who's fighting for that parity? Anyone got that amendment? I didn't think so. Members, each and every one of us on this floor are passionate about education. I'm showing my passion. This isn't a billionaire brought bill that I'm just hoping for a campaign donation. I'm okay to be sent home forever if my district doesn't care for this bill. I know what I'm doing here. I know why I was sent. And I know that I'm at peace if I'm on the front porch instead of another session. But that's not going to be the case. 77% of Republicans in Texas support expanded school choice, 51% of Democrats. Our offices are full of families begging us to get this done. But the teacher organizations don't want it. Yeah, less than 2% of public school students served. And across the nation, 32 states of school choice programs, 2.4% of public school students are currently served. This concept that it is somehow an effort to defund, destabilize, or create discrimination, or essentially destroy a public school, I can't imagine in a bill that we're talking about in helping those that need help the most with a path in education that that kind of rhetoric would be used. I can't imagine it. I've been here a little while. I've not seen that, and I've seen a lot. A white kid bill, a rich kid bill, a coupon. Members, we're empowered by Texans to provide choices with the wealth of this state and to make decisions on their behalf in a responsible manner, being good stewards of taxpayer dollars. And we've got the framework. We've got a framework that other states that just passed ESA bills are regretting that they didn't have this model. This bill does not jeopardize public schools. In fact, the data shows that public schools have gotten better in other states that have expanded school choice. It is a tenet in American history that there is no greater way to improve a service than for those that may use that service to have the opportunity to exit. That is America. That's absolutely Texas. I hope that the House takes this legislation and passes the Senate bill quickly, and we go to conference and we continue to work to improve this bill every way we can. Every day thinking more and more, how can we be better? I promise you, I'm doing that. I had hoped that we would have 31 votes on this bill. Again, we have plenty of opportunities to oppose other bills throughout this session. I want to thank the members of the committee that worked so hard to bring this bill to the floor, that worked so hard through 2023 to stand up for these kids, to listen to their testimony and the plight of their parents in committee. The work of our education committee and the work of this body, it matters. And it's sending shockwaves across the nation. States want to follow Texas. Texas should follow no state on education opportunities for those that need help the most. I appreciate your patience with my passionate remarks. Mr. President, members, I move final passage of Senate Bill 2.
Secretary will call the roll.
Alvarado, Betancourt, Birdwell, Blanco, Campbell, Cook, Creighton, Eckhart, Flores, Gutierrez, Hagenbu, Hall, Hancock, Hinojosa of Nueces, Hinojosa of Hidalgo, Huffman, Hughes, Johnson, King, Colcourse, Menendez, Middleton, Miles, Nichols, Parker, Paxton, Perry, Schwertner, Sparks, West, Zaffarini.
There being 19 ayes and 12 nays, Senator Creighton, your bill has passed, and we now look for the House, after this being the 6th time we passed school choice, to finally step up and give this opportunity to every child in Texas. Thank you, Senator Creighton. The bill is passed. Chair announces the signing of the following of the Presidents of the Senate.
Senate Concurrent Resolution number 11.
Following motion in writing, Secretary will read the motion.
Mr. President, I move to suspend Senate Rule 11.13 so that committees may meet during the reading and referral of bills. Motion by Zaffarini.
Any objection? Hearing none. Motion is adopted. Member, the President's desk is clear. Any announcements? And I knew when I said we'd be here till 4 a.m., which was really the math I figured that would get people moving a little quicker. So good job, everyone. The chair recognizes the Dean of the Senate for a highly privileged motion.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the Senate recess until 11 a.m. Friday, February 7th, for the reading and referral of bills. Upon the conclusion of the reading and referral of bills, I move that the Senate adjourn until 11 a.m. Tuesday, February 11th. Thank you.
Is there objection? Hearing none. The Senate stands in recess until 11 a.m. Friday, February 7th for the reading and referral of bills. Upon the conclusion of the reading and referral of bills, the Senate will stand adjourned until 11 a.m. Tuesday, February 11th. Good night, members. Thank you.